Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us. This week, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Maggie Marcus to the podcast. Dr. Marcus joined us for a conversation on bilingual learners, two-way immersion programs, and navigating the needs of English learners from a policy level, especially at a time of increased scrutiny on language learning and civic identity in the U.S. Dr. Marcus is the executive director of the Sullivan Family Charitable Foundation, which is dedicated to improving educational outcomes for English learners. She's also a fellow at the Century Foundation, a nonpartisan think tank, where her work focuses on English learners and where she co-founded the English Learners Pandemic Recovery Forum. She teaches pre- and in-service educators at the College of Education at the University of Maryland, College Park, where she obtained her PhD in applied linguistics and language education, with research in dual language programs and their impacts on students, parents, policymakers, and school leaders. She was previously an instructional coach in a bilingual DC public charter school and a former dual language education teacher in DC public schools. She started her teaching career in Puerto Rico as a Title I 9th grade Spanish teacher. Quick note before I cue up our discussion here, we had a hiccup with our recording software this week, which led to a bit of an abbreviated discussion with Dr. Marcus compared to some other guest conversations we've had. So we're sorry that we're missing out a little bit there. We felt like we had a lot more we wanted to ask her, and we hope maybe she'll let us follow up with another discussion down the line. And also, before we get started, if you haven't already done so, please sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter to get the latest updates, episode announcements, resources, and workshop offerings from Moonbeam Multimedia. If there's a story in your local educational community that you would like us to cover, please contact us using our website or write to us at hello@16to1.com.
I am Dr. Maggie Marcus. I am the executive director of the Sullivan Family Charitable Foundation, and I am also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland in College Park.
Thank you for joining us today. You live in Maryland. It says that you have 3 bilingual daughters, a menagerie of pets. Are any of the pets also bilingual? That is the question that I had of the first pets.
Question. I get that question more than you might think.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Not that clever.
No, it is clever. It is clever. It's just funny. I always think about that. I think the dogs are more bilingual than the cats.
Okay.
Because they, have to sit and relax and all these things, whereas the cats kind of live their life and,
cats are just living. Yeah. No language necessary.
No language necessary. Yeah. But yes, they are bilingual. I do try to maintain that bilingualism in Spanish and English. But the dogs are Portuguese water dogs.
Okay.
So I kind of feel like maybe we should get a Portuguese teacher or tutor for them.
Are those the same kind of dogs the Obamas had? Weren't those Portuguese?
They are.
Those are beautiful.
They are.
Yes,
those
they're
are
very
such
pretty
cool
dogs.
Yeah,
they look like show
neat.
dogs to me at all times.
Do.
Some
They're
dogs just
so
always look like they're always show dogs no matter what. They do seem that way.
These ones, they just got their hair cut, so they look great.
They're looking fresh.
It's getting a little long, but they're looking,
Well,
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today. I want to just get right into it, kind of talk about a little bit of your work, your background. You approach bilingual education, that's kind of your focus, and you're coming at it from several different angles. You're a classroom instructor, you're a researcher, you're also a funder who is directing philanthropic energy toward bilingual education initiatives. I want to hear from you what being bilingual unlocked for you personally and professionally. What sort of motivates and sets the stage for all this work?
That's a great question. I think when I think back, I started Spanish because I didn't like the French teacher. So it was not, it wasn't
such a real reason though.
Yeah, such a real reason.
With my students, they're like, it's the teacher, it happens.
And I see my oldest now is a 7th grader, and I was a 7th grader, and it was a quarter of Spanish, a quarter of French. And yeah, it was like, I have to take a year-long class next year, so I'm going to take Spanish. And it ended up, I loved it. I ended up taking Spanish all throughout high school, and had the opportunity to take a class where I went into a bilingual school. And so like an internship, basically, it was called Cultural Exploration. And I spent 2 days a week in a first grade classroom with all native Spanish speaking children, most of them born in the US. And I loved it. And it was it was 19, I'm going to age myself a little, but it was 1998, 99. And Massachusetts would then outlaw bilingual education in 2001. So already like the tensions were high. And I think as a high school student, I wasn't really thinking about, like, I didn't really understand the political context of it. But I remember
feel odd about it in real time though? Were you conscious enough that something weird was going on? Was it percolating through the layers of teenagerness there? Yeah. Yes,
I think two things. One was that the teacher, my teacher was the bilingual teacher, and she taught both Spanish and English. And then there was another first grade classroom where they were all English speaking children. And that teacher made some remarks about the Spanish speaking students that were racist. And so, there was that, like the underlying tone, prejudices against this group of students. And then also just thinking when my mentor, Miss Palmer, was talking about how they were going to close the school and these students were going to go to sheltered English instruction. And again, like not really knowing what that meant, but thinking about the injustice of it. And thinking like, well, that, parents can get a waiver, or if you don't speak Spanish, but you want to learn Spanish, you can be in a two-way, or a bilingual program. And so I remember that being, thinking
the
like
hoops that were coming up. Yeah.
And like, wow, that seems really unfair. And it really inspired to go to Puerto Rico after I graduated college. So it inspired me to want to teach in Latin America. I didn't really know what that meant. But then I ended up studying Spanish all through college. And I think what I really liked was just the ability it gave me to connect with other people and really get to know culture well, right? Like if you're visiting a place and you can speak the language that they speak, you have such a better understanding of what's happening, right?
It's a totally different experience. Or even to be with someone who is fluent too.
Exactly.
I've kind of felt that.
Yes. And so, and I ended up in college, I worked at Starbucks and ended up with this young woman came in one day and was like, hey, can I have a coffee? And I said, oh, you have an accent. Where are you from? And she said, I'm from Spain. And I was like, ay, qué bueno, eres de España, blah, blah, blah. And she and I became fast friends. We're still friends 20 plus years later. And so she was from Segovia, Spain, or is from Segovia, Spain. And when I went to study in Spain, I spent a lot of time with her. And
that's
Kate,
so cool.
To your point, really got to know, how to talk like a young person in Spain.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was in Poland this past summer, and my experiences being with people who could speak Polish and not were completely different things. Because I wasn't a quick learner at a foreign language anyways, and then you throw Polish into the mix and it's not super friendly as far as that goes. But totally different experiences going from Poland with a speaker and without, but
totally. I remember, this, and having friends in my program in Spain who didn't have native Spanish speaking friends and they were like, Maggie, tell me, how do I, what do I say to this guy? Or, these things, because
coach me. Yeah,
exactly. Because I had so much, I was so lucky to have met this friend, Anna, and spend time with her. And yes. So I think that, and it kind of took me down this path and I never thought I wanted to be a teacher for a career, but I knew I wanted to teach after college. And so I did that for a couple of years and then did some other things and found myself back in a place where, I was like, wait, my husband was like, but you like teaching. Why don't you go back to that? And I was like, okay.
Oh, I do.
So,
Well, can I ask you about your time with the CIA really
sure.
quickly?
Yeah,
So, one of your bios said you were economic analyst. Is that kind of how
yeah,
you would just, okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was accurate to what I'd
that's
read.
correct. Yep.
Okay, so the one thing I'm always thinking of right now, I'm teaching seniors, and so everything with a senior right now is like, do I have to know this for my future? Was that what were your skills like bilingual? What do you consider yourself bilingual before I
Yes.
call you that? Okay.
Yes.
Was that part of your work with the CIA? Because my favorite thing to tell my kids is like, you're going to use this someday. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to like think like what part of your path led you to that, and then like, can you talk about that at all? Like what that work
Yeah.
was like with your language, or
Yes. I think two things. One, I would say like my economics background really came
for
in
sure. I'm sure
full
that was
stop.
a
That
large,
was
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
super, which was really interesting to me because I think I studied economics for a long time and was like, okay,
Yeah.
and I loved it. I mean, don't get me wrong, but then finally to be in a place where we talked about like inflation and like,
Sure.
stuff that
All of these
whatever,
classes that you
all
would
of these,
like,
right,
yeah.
that I was like, oh, real life. But yes, so I was focused on Latin America for that reason, that was my background, that was my
Gotcha.
interest. And so I could read, I mean, I would have to read like papers in Spanish, like papers from the country that I was, the analyst of,
For sure.
papers, not a lot of like intelligence, I would say in Spanish, but a lot of just knowing
Like
and like
reference materials and things
yeah,
like that
reference
was kind
materials.
of
So yes, it was very relevant. And I think now, like whenever I talk to people, young people now who are like studying another language or I forget what they call them, but like Arabic,
sure,
Chinese,
sure. Like the frequency or whatever of likelihood of experience or something like that, basically.
yes, I'll say like, oh, have you considered working for the CIA?
Right, because you know that those pathways are like,
Yes,
that makes sense.
yes.
So yours was definitely a combination then of your focus on. Yeah, gotcha.
Yes. And I think, I mean, that was also an interesting experience because the CIA recruited from my graduate school in Massachusetts. And I studied economics in Latin America in grad school. And I remember the recruiter being like, we don't do development, right?
That's not our thing.
That's not our thing.
Yeah.
And like,
And I was like, yeah, but like economics and
but-
Latin America. And I do think I loved my colleagues. They came over for Thanksgiving this year. I mean, I'm still close to a couple of my colleagues there. Super smart people, great place, like work balance,
Sure.
lifestyle. But ultimately, I think I wanted to be doing something that was more
You knew
like,
that wasn't it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
What a great opportunity to go do something and figure out that you love it, but it's not what you want.
Absolutely. And to be, I say that too to my like college mentees. It's like you don't have to do something forever after college. You can do this and then you can
Yes.
do something else. And I mean, I say that to my girls too. They're like, well, how can I be an actress and a lawyer? And I'm like, I don't know, do one and then
you
do
can.
the,
Yeah.
Right,
I
like,
think mine, I wanted to be a paleontologist and an astronaut at the same time when I was a kid. Those were my two that I wanted to put together
Those-
somehow.
Those feel far,
A
but
sp-
maybe.
Space,
Yeah.
space dinosaurs.
space dinosaurs.
It wasn't on the table. Maybe
Yeah.
someday.
Still is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was it? I think you mentioned a moment where your husband was like, you really liked that thing. What is it that you love about working with bilingual students or in those contexts? What really excites you about that work? And then also, do you feel that kind of educational setting requires more flexibility than other kinds of learning environments? I think those are maybe two related questions, but I'll let you answer.
Yes. I mean, I would say yes, more flexibility because also you're communicating with parents who are native speakers of Spanish, let's say, or other languages, but for all intents and purposes, I can use Spanish as the other language. And so I think there's those cultural pieces too, right? Like the way that one of my students' mothers went to school or didn't go to school in her home country is different from how we do school in the States. And so I think you have to give some grace and also some understanding and be flexible about how people show up. I think also Our English learners tend to be, they're more likely to have uneducated parents and they're more likely to live in poverty. And so being flexible about like when we meet or how we meet or different ways that we might interact with them or engage them, I think really has to be
Totally different starting points.
Totally different starting points.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think honestly, I mean, Chelsea, I love speaking Spanish. When I was in Puerto Rico, I taught in Spanish that first year, as you mentioned. And then the next year I was an elementary English teacher and I hated it. I really didn't like it. And I think for me, like part of it was just being able to use this talent or this asset that I had spent so much time cultivating in myself. And that, like we talked about, that ability to connect with people. Mm-hmm. And so I think also what I really like is the social justice component, especially thinking about English learners. And also, I mean, we think about what's happening now in schools with ICE raids and fear. The work of supporting dual language students, to me, is my contribution to social justice. That's really important to me. I'll start just to share what two-way immersion is, in case that's an unfamiliar term with your listeners. What it really means is a balanced or almost balanced population of two different linguistic groups of students. So let's say we have English speakers and native English speakers and native Spanish speakers. The idea is to have at least 30% of students be that target language. So in this case, it would be Spanish. Up to 50%, up to being like a split group. And that's because then peers can learn from each other. They also, especially for the Spanish speakers, have the opportunity to be the experts in their own language and to build that confidence of using that language in a content-focused way. So that's the other piece that's really important about dual language education or two-way immersion, is that the students are receiving content in the target language. So they might have math and science in Spanish, and they might also have math in English and then social studies, and they would have language arts in both languages. And the models are different, but the bottom line is that you have about 50% of time in both languages. In some cases, they start heavier on the target language, like 90% Spanish, and then the model as the kids get older shifts to a more 50%. By middle school, it's more like 25%, like two classes of the target language. Mm-hmm. And usually by high school, it's about one class. But that's because also if students are in a high quality two-way immersion program, it's about 5 to 7 years that they will be the Spanish speakers on par with their native English speakers. So that's what it really takes. And the same with learning Spanish for English speakers. It takes about 5 to 7 years for them if they're in a two-way immersion program. And actually, a lot of times the native English speakers don't surpass. It's usually the Spanish speakers that surpass the English the English-speaking peers. But that 5 to 7 years is what we use as a reference for fluency in language.
So let me make this distinction. My exposure to this is just from taking a bunch of French classes through high school and college. Those were not two-way immersion programs. I do remember showing up to high school and the teacher being like, the goal is we're doing this all in French. You're showing up and doing this all in French. And I always thought that was strange because for me, I was always like, aren't I missing part of a language education of the kind of going from point A to point B out loud? Isn't there something, I remember there was a Spanish-speaking student who was in my high school orchestra, and my high school orchestra teacher could speak Spanish pretty well. And listening to the two of them work through, he'd say a word in Spanish, and she'd be like, oh, it means this. They'd work to the conclusion and have like a functional relationship for this orchestra to work. And seeing that kind of exchange happen where we got from point A to point B helped me learn a lot more Spanish than I otherwise would have if it had just been like him trying to stumble through only saying it in Spanish. So I was I'm curious, is the only way to get that attitude of instruction to do one of these two-way immersion programs, or are those attitudes evolving elsewhere, or what does that look like?
I think it's really best to be in an immersive environment, right? So like living in a place where, when I lived in Spain or Puerto Rico, having to navigate the language on a day-to-day basis is really the best way. It doesn't mean that you can't learn another language. I mean, I definitely had a traditional linguistic experience when I was in middle and high school for the most part. But I think one of the things that we don't do well in this country is we don't give students a lot of in foreign language classes. And I would say, Kate, you may agree or disagree with this, but we don't give students enough time to speak, 100%. To practice their oral language. And I think that's true in language classes and perhaps other content areas. But really our students need opportunities to speak. And so if you have authentic opportunities, even the example you were giving, Chelsea, to engage with a native speaker, right? That's going to really help you understand your verbal expression.
And it was just really cool to watch, like as a student in that classroom, to get to benefit from that exchange.
Yes, I think we also kind of learn language in an artificial way, right? At least I remember, doing like skits, or like, I don't know, pretending to be at a restaurant, right? I like to think that
approach.
Yeah. And I like to think that now, like, I hear, kids go to a restaurant and they order it, right? So at least there's some movement towards more authentic experiences. But I think especially for our English learners, that opportunity to be able to have content in their native language, and also then their families feel empowered, right? When their parents can help with schoolwork. That is a really, really powerful practice.
Kate, you had some data in here. I didn't want to skip over it. You had read this report, the Century Foundation report on the demand for bilingual education.
The thing that I was reading was the interest in dual language education and it being so high. And I think the lowest, that percentage was like 61%. And that was on the income was less than $50,000 per year. Because I was reading it impressed that the numbers were as high as they seem to me. But I'm also in Appalachia, so take that for what you will.
You're referring to some data about different socioeconomic groups. And
it was like
importance of dual language learning.
Yeah. Those are the people that are my students' parents. So I just thought that was interesting. But I wondered if you thought that was where you expected it to be, or is that showing growth, or what's that doing?
That's a good question. I think I was really happy with that as well.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised that the more education or the higher the income level, right, people were interested in
that part
bilingual.
I expected.
Yeah,
for sure.
like that we definitely, I think, expected. What we hear, and part of the reason that we did this research is anecdotally, we hear sometimes that Spanish-speaking parents or Latino parents aren't interested in dual language education. And so I think what we set out to show was that actually they are. What that shows too is that, the more education you have, I mean, maybe that would even make it higher, right, than 61%. Right. But I think that dispels the myth a little bit about, they don't want dual language education. I mean, I do anecdotally hear sometimes parents who say, I don't want my kid to get confused, or I want them to get a good job. So, you hear that sometimes, but I think largely this was really positive to say, no, parents want this, and Latino parents want that.
And had you asked me what I think my students' parents would have said, I would have been like, not even on their radar. So like that absolutely, that challenges everything I would have said too.
California is also a super interesting context because they outlawed bilingual education for 17 years. I think now they're like, that was like, we really messed up. And so it's bigger than Maryland or DC or Ohio. But there's a lot more public push for dual language education there and a much larger population there than there is in DC, for example.
Sure.
So I wonder, that just the sort of general messaging,
Yeah.
if that also influences that number.
One of the questions I had, this is more about policy, so I'm jumping a little bit, was about the roles of state departments requiring bilingual learning, and if you think that outliers like California and Texas and Florida are the reason why we should or should not do like a federal, is it a state by state case where we are advocating in Ohio and our other states to support this type of education, or do you think it makes sense to tackle it at the federal level? And I was mentioning California because that was one of the states that I had in my mind. Like, is that a reason to not handle it federally and to let a state like California have more control over these decisions? Or do you think that consistency is probably what's best?
I mean, I think Texas has the law of, or the rule of 20.
Right.
So like you have 20 students who all have the same native language. You have to offer bilingual education or dual language education.
Right.
I think that's fabulous. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and of course now there's no way we could do something federally like that.
No, not at all.
But I think the more states that do that, if we were living in a different sort of picture.
Some other timeline somewhere they're doing this. Yeah.
I mean, it would be really interesting, and it will be interesting to see on a state level if states move that direction. I mean, it is fascinating to look at the differences between Texas and California with bilingual education because Texas has I want to say it's close to 40% of its English learners in two-way immersion programs.
Yeah.
California, I think, is single digits, or it's very low.
So interesting.
And part of that is because of the outlawing of bilingual education, but having a state law that would require some sort of implementation or just choice is crucial. And we talk about that in the context of DC too. I don't know. DC has about 10,000 English learners, and I think there's 23 charter schools that are two-way immersion or immersion, not all Spanish. And then there's about 12 that are DC public schools, Spanish, English, immersion. So it's a much smaller demographic, but I just feel like that is a game changer because it gives also choice to the parents, right?
We only have a few minutes left. I want to ask this one question about pandemic recovery because you've done some work in that area. Is there anything in particular that English learners as a population, a sort of subpopulation of students, are you learning anything peculiar about pandemic recovery from that specific group of students?
Well, I think I was revisiting an article that my colleague Connor and I wrote in 2021 about the English Learner Pandemic Recovery Forum and what was happening in that time. What I was thinking about was we didn't have a great system before the pandemic. So yes, the pandemic exacerbated, I think, inequities that were in existence. We are seeing that for a couple of years that students weren't being assessed on their English, like with the WIDA test, the access test. There was a gap of data collected, and we're seeing now slower recovery rates that aren't necessarily back to pre-pandemic levels, especially in literacy for English learners. And so I think that's what's hard is thinking about, we're all still 6 years later thinking about recovery or post-pandemic and especially with data and a lot of places thinking like, oh, we're up back to pre-pandemic. But our English learners, I think, because of the vulnerabilities that this particular group of students have, are not showing the same level of gains or recovery. Now we couple that with chronic absenteeism, students who are staying at home because they're scared to go to school or their parents are scared for them to go to school. There were some years in between, but I still feel like we're going to see more data in the next few years that shows not only pandemic, but then what happens when you cripple it with a federal policy where these students are living in fear and being targeted at schools, which traditionally are a safe haven. And
they were in the safe place.
And so I think I don't know the data that schools are collecting on that, like who's not showing up, and just the trauma that how that impacts student learning. I mean, there's been some recent articles on that, which is really interesting. So I think we have a lot of work to do still, but we weren't killing it before the pandemic with English learners either.
Right. We're just bringing more light to the things that we already knew were a weakness in some ways. Yeah.
Do you have anything that you would like our listeners to know about that you are working on?
What I would love for your listeners to get curious about what's happening in their states, cities, schools, about especially with their English learners and offerings. If they, is there dual language education? One piece I constantly stress with my students at University of Maryland is that they're teachers, but they're also advocates. And Kate, I don't know if that resonates with you too, but I think part of working with English learners is that you have to be an advocate for this group of students. And so I would just, whether or not your listeners are teachers themselves, to really get curious about what advocacy looks like, what the English learner population locally looks like, and what the school context looks like.
Hello from the future.
Hey, it's us.
Where we are recording this. We didn't get to finish our remarks with Maggie. We had some technical difficulties in this episode this week. Cut off a little early, like we mentioned at the beginning, but we wanted to get her what I learned this week. So we asked Dr. Marcus to follow up with us, and she sent us this information. She said she recently attended a yoga retreat where we did some meditation and we used a quadrinity check-in, where you check in on your physical self, your intellect, emotional self, and your spiritual self. I've been doing this check-in in the morning to set the tone for the day.
That's interesting.
It sounded very calming. It's
like a grounding kind of.
It is.
Yeah.
And this reminded me, this is actually the same teacher that I was talking about in the episode earlier, the one who spoke Spanish with the student in the orchestra who was also speaking Spanish. She is a yoga person as well, and a meditation person.
She is.
We had just talked about this the other week, about how we find 5 minutes before we have to go do something or be somewhere and just turn off the lights and sit quietly and meditate to just kind of chill things out before you go into a big moment where you have a moment to catch your breath, right? Like an intentional moment of quiet. So I kind of like these practices. I think they're, and it's nice to have some structure to it too. I'm going to have to research what this is and see how it works.
You and I have, I'm sure, joked on here before about our love of floor time, and I think
Floor
that's
time.
that's what I love about floor time is the it's poorly named. I mean, well, not actually.
No,
it's perfectly named.
Completely accurate.
It's exactly what it is. It's just a chance to lay on the floor.
Yeah, it's not very structured. It's just
It's not structured.
it's all it is what it is called.
Yeah, it is. It's just laying there, and no pillows, no nothing, no frill.
No.
We just lay
No
there.
comfort whatsoever added
But-
to the equation.
It is helpful for me.
Same.
And it's usually something that, like, the week of homecoming, Chelsea will find me having, or just like
Stressful times.
a
in
very
your life.
stressful time, and something that my body likes to do is to shut down. And so this is something that I do to try to avoid the inevitable shutdown nature.
I like it. What did you learn in the last couple of weeks?
New York City recently had, well, a couple weeks ago now, a very large snowstorm for them.
A blizzard,
A
yes.
blizzard, yeah. I guess that's a big one for everybody probably, but it was a big snowstorm. And Mayor Mamdani gave the kids like an actual snow day for the first time in years. Like, they had not gotten like an actual snow day with like no remote work, no logging in, no nothing in 7 years.
Wow.
And the announcement was very cute because he was just like, have a snow day and don't log in. And so I love that. I love, this is a conversation that we have all the time in the winter, is like, at what point do we do remote learning? Do we do remote learning? Is there anything good about, all those questions. And sometimes you just need the day off and you don't need to log into a Zoom, and kids should be kids. And so I am glad that they got to enjoy that for those that could.
The proverbial snow day sledding with your pals in elementary school is like, it's a formative experience. Yeah, it's a formative experience.
It is.
And I do think it is nice when kids can experience
Yeah.
that particular joy.
And I, as a teacher, I love a snow day call. And so I'm not any better than them.
Okay.
If I went sledding, I would be injured, but I'm sledding in my mind, let's say.
Okay. You're sledding in your heart.
My
of hearts.
heart.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. What did you learn?
We watched a documentary, I guess it was, about John Williams.
We did,
John Williams,
yeah.
the film composer,
Yes.
musician,
One
conductor.
of the greats.
So I learned about John Williams. He had a bit of a tumultuous relationship, so to speak, with the Boston Pops Orchestra.
Yes.
I did not know this. He was the principal conductor there for 13 years, despite officially resigning at one point and then subsequently withdrawing the resignation and staying on for 9 more years after that. But the resignation incident happened because there were some orchestra members who apparently hissed at Williams during a read of a new piece that he had brought to the orchestra. I think there's a perception that he didn't have the orchestra's respect, or at least it was his perception that he didn't have the orchestra's respect. This sounded like
some orchestra drama.
Yeah, this sounded like professional musician
yeah.
drama to me in a way that was like kind of familiar, but yeah.
They kind of alluded to him like not being as serious of a musician because of the type of music he writes,
the
being
perception,
for movies and things like that. And so
the perception amongst classically trained professional musicians that those who compose for film are doing something less serious.
Yes.
That was the implication was that might have had something to do with the deterioration of that relationship. But who knows? Regardless, I can't imagine booing and hissing at somebody like John Williams, given where his career has gone. So that's a funny one to consider. But yeah, that's what I learned. I learned about the drum and the Boston Pops.
it was very interesting.
It was. Anything else?
I don't have anything else, do you?
I don't think so. I think that's it. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
It's almost spring.
Almost.
Goodbye.
Bye. Hello, listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of 16 to 1. This show is produced by a 2-woman team, your co-hosts Katie Day, our lead researcher and social media manager, and Chelsea Adams, that's me. I edit and produce the show, and I also make the music you hear in our episodes. Visit our website at 16to1.com for show notes and resources, or to get in touch with us. 16 to 1 is sponsored by Moonbeam Multimedia, a firm that partners with civic innovators, educators, and mission-driven organizations to help create stronger communities.